The ornaments glittered, mocking me. Laughter, sharp and cruel, echoed from the living room as I arranged the final dessert plates. They thought it was over. They thought they had broken me. But the crimson I tasted wasn't mine, it was the iron tang of a promise I made myself in that very moment. They would regret this night. If you have a sister who would stand by you through anything, subscribe now. Christmas Eve. It had always been sacred. A time for family, for traditions, for the kind of warmth you can only find gathered around a crackling fireplace with the people you love. Or, at least, thought you loved. My name is Luna, and for 30 years, Christmas Eve at my parents' house was everything. Mom would spend weeks perfecting her apple pie. Dad would tell the same corny jokes. My brother, Ethan, would accidentally set off the smoke alarm trying to deep fry the turkey. And I would meticulously craft the dessert presentation, a skill I'd honed since I was a little girl arranging gingerbread men on a platter. This year, it was a chocolate raspberry torte, a family favorite. But this year, the sweetness felt like poison coating my tongue. I'd sunk every last dime I had into the family business, a local bakery my grandfather started. I believed in it. I believed in them. Ethan had come to me, tears in his eyes, begging for a loan. The bakery was going under, he said, and without my help, everything our family had built would be lost. Naively, stupidly, I liquidated my savings, signed over my apartment as collateral, and handed him the money. I even ignored the nagging feeling in my gut, the one that whispered things weren't quite right. He'd promised to pay me back, of course. Soon, he'd said, with a charming smile that had always worked on me. As soon as things turn around. Things didn't turn around. Instead, they got exponentially worse. The bakery closed its doors 3 months later. Ethan declared bankruptcy, leaving me with nothing but debt and the crushing weight of betrayal. My parents, instead of offering support, sided with him. "He's your brother, Luna," my mother had said, her voice cold. "You should have been more careful." My father simply shook his head, disappointment etched on his face. "You always were too trusting," he muttered. Now, here I was, serving them dessert in their perfectly decorated living room, the aroma of pine and cinnamon thick in the air, while my own life crumbled around me. I forced a smile, placing a slice of the torte in front of my mother. She barely glanced at me, her attention focused on Ethan, who was regaling everyone with a fabricated story about his business misfortune. My brother even winked at my father, who chuckled. That's when I felt the first crack in my heart. As I watched them laugh, a wave of nausea washed over me. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. I could barely breathe. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the apartment. It was the complete and utter disregard for my feelings, the casual way they dismissed my pain as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. They saw me as weak, as someone they could use and discard without consequence. I carefully placed the last slice of torte on the table, my hands trembling slightly. Ethan raised his glass. "To family," he announced, his voice booming with false cheer. They all echoed the toast, their eyes sparkling with holiday spirit. I remained silent, my gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight. That night, they celebrated their victory. They reveled in my defeat. But what they didn't know was that their celebration was premature. The gears of my mind were already turning, plotting, planning, and waiting for the perfect moment to unleash the storm they had so carelessly created. I would play their game, wear their mask, and lull them into a false sense of security. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. And that was their biggest mistake. They thought they knew Luna. But they were about to discover a side of me they never imagined existed. The ornaments glittered, mocking me. Laughter, sharp and cruel, echoed from the living room as I arranged the final dessert plates. They thought it was over. They thought they had broken me. But the crimson I tasted wasn't mine, it was the iron tang of a promise I made myself in that very moment. They would regret this night. Christmas Eve. It had always been sacred. A time for family, for traditions, for the kind of warmth you can only find gathered around a crackling fireplace with the people you love. Or, at least, thought you loved. My name is Luna, and for 30 years, Christmas Eve at my parents' house was everything. Mom would spend weeks perfecting her apple pie. Dad would tell the same corny jokes. My brother, Ethan, would accidentally set off the smoke alarm trying to deep fry the turkey. And I would meticulously craft the dessert presentation, a skill I'd honed since I was a little girl arranging gingerbread men on a platter. This year, it was a chocolate raspberry torte, a family favorite. But this year, the sweetness felt like poison coating my tongue. I'd sunk every last dime I had into the family business, a local bakery my grandfather started. I believed in it. I believed in them. Ethan had come to me, tears in his eyes, begging for a loan. The bakery was going under, he said, and without my help, everything our family had built would be lost. Naively, stupidly, I liquidated my savings, signed over my apartment as collateral, and handed him the money. I even ignored the nagging feeling in my gut, the one that whispered things weren't quite right. He'd promised to pay me back, of course. Soon, he'd said, with a charming smile that had always worked on me. As soon as things turn around. Things didn't turn around. Instead, they got exponentially worse. The bakery closed its doors 3 months later. Ethan declared bankruptcy, leaving me with nothing but debt and the crushing weight of betrayal. My parents, instead of offering support, sided with him. "He's your brother, Luna," my mother had said, her voice cold. "You should have been more careful." My father simply shook his head, disappointment etched on his face. "You always were too trusting," he muttered. Now, here I was, serving them dessert in their perfectly decorated living room, the aroma of pine and cinnamon thick in the air, while my own life crumbled around me. I forced a smile, placing a slice of the torte in front of my mother. She barely glanced at me, her attention focused on Ethan, who was regaling everyone with a fabricated story about his business misfortune. My brother even winked at my father, who chuckled. That's when I felt the first crack in my heart. As I watched them laugh, a wave of nausea washed over me. The air in the room felt thick and suffocating. I could barely breathe. It wasn't just the money. It wasn't just the apartment. It was the complete and utter disregard for my feelings, the casual way they dismissed my pain as if it were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. They saw me as weak, as someone they could use and discard without consequence. I carefully placed the last slice of torte on the table, my hands trembling slightly. Ethan raised his glass. "To family," he announced, his voice booming with false cheer. They all echoed the toast, their eyes sparkling with holiday spirit. I remained silent, my gaze fixed on the flickering candlelight. That night, they celebrated their victory. They reveled in my defeat. But what they didn't know was that their celebration was premature. The gears of my mind were already turning, plotting, planning, and waiting for the perfect moment to unleash the storm they had so carelessly created. I would play their game, wear their mask, and lull them into a false sense of security. They had underestimated me. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. And that was their biggest mistake. They thought they knew Luna. But they were about to discover a side of me they never imagined existed. The person I trusted most was one of them. The days that followed Christmas were a blur of legal paperwork, frantic phone calls, and the gnawing anxiety of impending doom. The bank, unsurprisingly, was not sympathetic to my plight. They wanted their money, and they wanted it now. I tried to explain this situation, how I had been manipulated, how my own family had left me to drown in debt, but they were unmoved. "Business is business, Ms. Rossi," the loan officer said, his voice devoid of empathy. "We need to see a plan for repayment." I had no plan. My savings were gone, my apartment was on the verge of foreclosure, and my job at the bakery, well, that was gone too. Ethan, in his infinite cruelty, had made sure of that. He'd spread rumors, whispering to former colleagues that I was unstable, unreliable, a liability to the business. It didn't take long for me to be let go, another casualty of his selfish greed. Sleepless nights became the norm. I would lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of my debt pressing down on me like a physical burden. Every creak of the floorboards, every siren in the distance, sounded like the approaching footsteps of the bank, ready to take everything I had left. Food lost its appeal. I forced myself to eat, knowing I needed the energy to fight, but each bite felt like swallowing sand. My reflection in the mirror became a stranger, gaunt and hollow-eyed. The vibrant, optimistic Luna I once knew was fading, replaced by a shadow of bitterness and resentment. I attempted to reason with my parents, hoping they would see the gravity of the situation, that they would understand the extent of Ethan's deception. But they remained steadfast in their loyalty to him. "He's your brother," my mother repeated, as if that single word absolved him of all responsibility. "You need to support him." My father, ever the pragmatist, offered empty platitudes. "These things happen, Luna. You need to pick yourself up and move on." Move on? How could I move on when my life was in ruins, when my own family had actively participated in my destruction? Their words were like salt in an open wound, fueling the fire of my anger and hardening my resolve. I realized then that I was truly alone. I could not rely on anyone but myself. And if I was going to survive this, if I was going to reclaim my life, I would have to do it on my own terms. The first step was to find a way to delay the foreclosure. I spent days researching legal loopholes, poring over dense documents, desperately searching for any glimmer of hope. I discovered an obscure clause in my loan agreement, a technicality that could potentially buy me some time. It was a long shot, but it was the only option I had. I contacted a lawyer, a gruff, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Evans, who agreed to take my case. She warned me that it would be an uphill battle, that the bank had deep pockets and a team of ruthless lawyers, but she also saw the flicker of determination in my eyes. "I like your spirit, Luna," she said, a hint of a smile playing on her lips. "Let's give them hell." As I worked with Ms. Evans, a new plan began to formulate in my mind. It wasn't just about saving my apartment. It was about exposing Ethan for who he truly was, about making my parents see the consequences of their blind loyalty. It was about justice, about reclaiming my power, about making them pay for what they had done. The anger that had been simmering beneath the surface began to coalesce into a cold, calculated rage. I started documenting everything, every lie Ethan had told, every dismissive comment my parents had made, every detail of their betrayal. I knew that I needed proof, irrefutable evidence that would expose their deception to the world. The plan was dangerous, audacious, and potentially devastating, but I was willing to risk everything. I had nothing left to lose. The legal battle with the bank dragged on, each day chipping away at my already fragile hope. Ms. Evans fought valiantly, filing motions, presenting evidence, and arguing tirelessly on my behalf, but the bank's lawyers were relentless. They countered every move, exploited every loophole, and used their vast resources to wear us down. The stress was unbearable. I lost weight, I couldn't sleep, and my anxiety reached a fever pitch. I started having nightmares, vivid and terrifying visions of losing everything, of being homeless and destitute, of being abandoned by everyone I loved. The apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, a constant reminder of my impending doom. One evening, after a particularly grueling court hearing, Ms. Evans called me with devastating news. The judge had ruled in favor of the bank. The foreclosure was going ahead. I sank to the floor, the phone slipping from my grasp. The world seemed to spin around me, the walls closing in, the air growing thin. I couldn't breathe. It was over. I had lost. Everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in, was gone. I was drowning in a sea of debt, with no lifeline in sight. Despair washed over me, a cold, suffocating wave that threatened to consume me entirely. I wanted to give up, to surrender to the darkness, to simply let go. What was the point of fighting anymore? My family had betrayed me, the bank had crushed me, and the legal system had failed me. There was nothing left. As I sat there on the floor, tears streaming down my face, I noticed a small, framed photograph on my desk. It was a picture of my grandfather, the one who had started the bakery. He was smiling, his eyes crinkled at the corners, his face radiating warmth and kindness. He had always believed in me, even when I doubted myself. He had taught me the importance of hard work, of perseverance, of never giving up on your dreams. A spark of defiance flickered within me. I couldn't give up. I couldn't let them win. I owed it to my grandfather, I owed it to myself, to fight back, to reclaim my life, to seek justice for the wrongs that had been done to me. The despair didn't vanish entirely, but it was now mixed with a cold, steely resolve. I would not be a victim. I would be a survivor. I would use their cruelty, their greed, their arrogance against them. I would turn their victory into ashes. I picked up the phone and called Ms. Evans. "We're not done yet," I said, my voice trembling but firm. "I have a plan." That night, sleep eluded me once again. But this time, it wasn't the anxiety of impending doom that kept me awake. It was the adrenaline of planning, the thrill of the hunt, the burning desire for revenge. I spent hours poring over documents, searching for any weakness, any vulnerability, any secret that I could exploit. I revisited every conversation, every interaction, every event that had led to my current predicament, piecing together the puzzle, connecting the dots, uncovering the truth. Slowly, meticulously, a plan began to take shape, a plan so audacious, so daring, so potentially devastating that it both terrified and exhilarated me. It involved risk, deception, and a willingness to cross lines I never thought I was capable of crossing. But I was past the point of caring about the consequences. They had taken everything from me. Now, it was my turn to take something from them. I knew that I couldn't do this alone. I needed allies, people I could trust, people who shared my sense of outrage and injustice. I reached out to a few former colleagues from the bakery, people who had witnessed Ethan's behavior firsthand, people who had also been affected by his greed and mismanagement. To my surprise, they were eager to help. They had seen how I had been treated, how I had been betrayed, and they were just as angry as I was. They provided me with valuable information, with insights into Ethan's business dealings, with details about his personal life that I never would have known otherwise. One of them, a former accountant named David, revealed that Ethan had been siphoning money from the bakery for years, using shell corporations and offshore accounts to hide his illegal activities. This was the break I had been waiting for. This was the smoking gun that would expose him for the fraud that he was. But it wasn't enough. I needed more. I needed to understand the full extent of his deception, the depth of his depravity, the identities of everyone who had been complicit in his scheme. And that's when I realized that the key to unlocking the truth lay within my own family. My parents, despite their blind loyalty to Ethan, knew more than they were letting on. They had to. They had been involved in the business for years, they had access to the financial records, they had witnessed his behavior firsthand. The challenge was to get them to talk, to break through their wall of denial, to force them to confront the reality of their son's actions. And I knew exactly how to do it. Their biggest weakness? They thought they were untouchable. I started small, a digital footprint. A hidden camera disguised as a smoke detector, installed in their living room while they were out attending a charity gala. A voice-activated recorder tucked inside a teddy bear my niece had forgotten during her last visit. I needed to hear them, to see them, to catch them in their unguarded moments, when the mask slipped and the truth emerged. It felt invasive, wrong, but the memory of their betrayal fueled my resolve. Each day, I would meticulously review the recordings, listening for clues, watching for inconsistencies, analyzing their every word, their every gesture. Most of it was mundane, trivial chatter about social events, dinner plans, and the latest neighborhood gossip. But every now and then, a sliver of truth would emerge, a fleeting comment, a knowing glance, a carefully worded phrase that hinted at something deeper, something darker. Ethan, in particular, was a master of deception. He could spin a web of lies so intricate, so believable, that even I, who knew the truth, sometimes found myself questioning my own sanity. But there were cracks in his facade, moments when his carefully constructed persona would falter, revealing the cold, calculating manipulator beneath. During one recording, I caught him on a phone call, his voice low and urgent, discussing the transfer with an unknown individual. He mentioned offshore accounts, shell corporations, and a contingency plan in case things went south. It was cryptic, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions that he was involved in something illegal. The challenge was to connect the dots, to trace the money, to expose the full extent of his scheme. That's where David, the former accountant, came in. He had access to the bakery's financial records, both the official ones and the ones that had been carefully concealed from the public eye. He spent hours sifting through spreadsheets, bank statements, and invoices, looking for anomalies, for discrepancies, for anything that could link Ethan to the missing funds. He was a meticulous researcher, a financial sleuth, and his expertise proved invaluable. Together, we uncovered a complex web of transactions, a series of transfers to dummy corporations in the Cayman Islands, Switzerland, and Panama. The money had been laundered through a network of shell companies, disguised as legitimate business expenses, and then funneled into Ethan's personal accounts. The amounts were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars, all stolen from the bakery, all used to fund his lavish lifestyle. The evidence was damning, but I needed more. I needed to understand how my parents were involved, what they knew, and when they knew it. I decided to confront them directly, to force them to choose between their son and the truth. I invited them over for dinner, a seemingly innocent gathering, but I had a hidden agenda. I had prepared a dossier of evidence, a compilation of recordings, financial documents, and witness statements, all meticulously organized to expose Ethan's deception. As we sat at the table, the aroma of roasted chicken and rosemary filling the air, I laid out my case, calmly and methodically presenting the evidence. At first, they denied everything, dismissing my accusations as fabrications and conspiracy theories. But as I continued to present the evidence, their resistance began to crumble. They grew pale, their hands trembled, and their eyes darted nervously around the room. My mother started to cry, burying her face in her hands. My father remained silent, his face etched with a mixture of disbelief and shame. Finally, after hours of grilling, they cracked. They admitted that they had known about Ethan's activities, that they had turned a blind eye to his deception, that they had prioritized their loyalty to him over their responsibility to me. They claimed that they had done it out of love, that they had wanted to protect him from the consequences of his actions. But their excuses rang hollow. Their betrayal was unforgivable. I felt a surge of anger, a wave of disappointment, but also a sense of vindication. I had finally uncovered the truth. Now, it was time to unleash it upon the world. I gave them a choice. They could either cooperate with the authorities, confess their involvement in Ethan's scheme, and face the consequences of their actions, or I would expose them all. They begged for mercy, pleaded for forgiveness, but I remained firm. I had given them a chance to do the right thing, and they had chosen to protect a criminal over their own daughter. The anticipation was a knife's edge, each day a tick closer to 0 hour. They chose Ethan. The recording of that admission, the raw, gut-wrenching sound of my mother's sobs as she confessed to aiding her son's deception, became my most potent weapon. It wasn't just about the money anymore, though the stolen bakery funds were substantial. It was about the years of manipulation, the constant undermining, the way Ethan had systematically dismantled my confidence, turning my own family against me. That recording, combined with David's forensic accounting, painted a clear picture of Ethan's criminal enterprise, one that extended far beyond the bakery's walls. He had been involved in real estate scams, investment fraud, and even, I suspected, something far darker, hinted at in hushed phone calls and coded messages. The full scope of his depravity was sickening. Their weakness wasn't just thinking they were untouchable, it was their arrogance, their belief that their money and influence could shield them from any consequences. It was a fatal flaw, and one I intended to exploit to its fullest potential. My plan was simple, elegant, and utterly devastating. I would lure them into a false sense of security, make them believe that they had weathered the storm, that their secrets were safe, and then, at the precise moment of their greatest complacency, I would unleash the truth upon them. The first step was to disappear. I stopped answering their calls, I avoided their texts, I made myself invisible. I wanted them to think that I had given up, that I had accepted defeat, that I was no longer a threat. It was a risky move, but it was necessary. I needed them to lower their guard. During my self-imposed exile, I worked tirelessly, meticulously assembling my arsenal of evidence. I compiled the recordings, the financial documents, the witness statements, and the photographs into a comprehensive dossier, a damning indictment of Ethan's crimes and my parents' complicity. I contacted a journalist, a seasoned investigative reporter named Sarah, who had a reputation for exposing corruption and holding the powerful accountable. I anonymously sent her a copy of the dossier, along with a cryptic message: "The truth is hidden in plain sight." I knew that she would investigate, that she would follow the trail of breadcrumbs I had left for her, and that she would eventually uncover the full story. The waiting was excruciating. I felt like a coiled spring, wound tighter and tighter, ready to snap at any moment. But I knew that patience was key. I had to wait for the perfect opportunity, for the moment when Ethan and my parents were most vulnerable. That moment came sooner than I expected. Ethan, emboldened by my silence and fueled by his own arrogance, decided to throw a lavish party, a celebration of his success, a display of his wealth and power. It was to be held at his newly acquired mansion, a gaudy, ostentatious monstrosity that reeked of ill-gotten gains. He invited everyone, from local politicians to prominent business leaders, all eager to bask in his reflected glory. It was the perfect stage for my final act. I knew that I couldn't attend the party myself. My presence would be too disruptive, too confrontational. I needed to strike from the shadows, to orchestrate a spectacle that would expose the truth to the world without revealing my own hand. I enlisted the help of David and Sarah, the journalist, to execute my plan. David, using his tech skills, would hack into the mansion's audiovisual system and broadcast the recording of my parents' confession over the loudspeakers. Sarah, armed with the dossier of evidence, would be there to document the fallout, to capture the reactions of the guests, and to ensure that the story was reported accurately and without bias. The night of the party arrived, and I found myself pacing nervously in my apartment, the anticipation building to a fever pitch. I imagined Ethan, resplendent in his tailored suit, holding court amidst his admirers, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I pictured my parents, smiling nervously, trying to maintain a facade of normalcy, while their secrets simmered beneath the surface. I felt a surge of both anger and satisfaction. They had chosen this path, they had made their bed, and now they were about to lie in it. I received a text message from David, system hacked. Ready to go. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. Execute, I replied. A few minutes later, my phone rang. It was Sarah, her voice trembling with excitement. It's happening, she whispered. The recording is playing. People are screaming. Ethan is going ballistic. Your parents look like they're about to faint. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment, the culmination of months of planning, the sweet taste of revenge. Document everything, I said. The world needs to see this. The line went dead. I sat there in silence, listening to the distant sirens wailing in the night, knowing that my life would never be the same. The next day, the story broke. Sarah's article, accompanied by the recording of my parents' confession and the damning financial documents, was splashed across the front pages of every newspaper and broadcast on every news channel. Ethan's empire crumbled overnight. His business partners abandoned him, his political allies disavowed him, and his reputation was ruined beyond repair. The authorities launched an investigation, and he was soon facing a litany of charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. My parents, exposed for their complicity, were ostracized by their community and forced to live in shame. The bakery, once a symbol of their success, was seized by the authorities and sold off to pay off Ethan's debts. They lost everything. And me? I just smiled. But even as I reveled in their downfall, a part of me felt a sense of emptiness, a void that even revenge couldn't fill. The betrayal had left a permanent scar, a deep wound that would never fully heal. And as I looked out at the city lights, I wondered if the price of justice had been worth it, or if I had simply become the very monster I had sought to destroy. Then the phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. A voice, cold and distorted, spoke one word, checkmate. Then the line went dead. The voice on the other end, that distorted whisper of checkmate, sent a shard of ice through my veins. It wasn't a threat, not exactly, but a chilling acknowledgement, a silent promise of consequences I couldn't yet comprehend. I spent the next few days in a state of heightened paranoia, jumping at shadows, scrutinizing every interaction, wondering who was watching me, who was coming for me, and what form their retribution would take. The police offered protection, but I declined. I couldn't shake the feeling that involving them would only escalate the situation, drawing more attention to myself and endangering those around me. I knew I had to be proactive, to anticipate their next move, to prepare for the worst. I doubled down on my security measures, installing cameras, reinforcing my doors, and learning self-defense techniques. Sleep became a luxury, haunted by nightmares of shadowy figures and whispered threats. But amidst the fear, a flicker of defiance burned within me. I refused to be intimidated, to be silenced, to be driven into hiding. I had exposed the truth, I had brought down a criminal empire, and I would not cower in the face of their revenge. I decided to turn the tables, to go on the offensive, to uncover the identity of the voice on the phone and expose their network of complicity. I enlisted David's help once again, tasking him with tracing the call and identifying the caller. He worked tirelessly, navigating the dark corners of the internet, following digital breadcrumbs, and piecing together fragments of information. He discovered that the call had originated from a burner phone, purchased with cash and registered to a fake name. But he also uncovered a connection to a known criminal organization, a shadowy syndicate with ties to Ethan's illicit activities. The organization specialized in money laundering, extortion, and other illicit trades, and they had been instrumental in facilitating Ethan's scheme. The checkmate call was a message from them, a warning that I had disrupted their operations and that they would not tolerate my interference. They were coming after me, not just to avenge Ethan, but to protect their own interests. I knew that I was outmatched, that I was facing a formidable enemy with vast resources and a ruthless reputation. But I also knew that I couldn't back down, that I had to fight back, not just for myself, but for everyone who had been victimized by Ethan and his cronies. I decided to go public with my story, to expose the criminal organization and their connection to Ethan's scheme. I contacted Sarah, the journalist, and provided her with the information that David had uncovered. She was initially hesitant, fearing for her own safety, but I convinced her that it was our duty to expose the truth, no matter the cost. She agreed to write the story, but only if we could provide irrefutable evidence of the organization's involvement. That's when I decided to take a risk, to infiltrate their network and gather the evidence myself. I knew it was a dangerous mission, one that could cost me my life, but I felt I had no other choice. I contacted a former associate of Ethan's, a disgruntled employee who had been cheated out of his share of the profits. He was initially reluctant to help, fearing retribution from the organization, but I offered him protection and a chance to redeem himself. He agreed to become my mole, to provide me with access to the organization's inner circle. He fed me information, introduced me to key players, and guided me through the treacherous landscape of their criminal enterprise. I played the role of a corrupt accountant, eager to launder money and facilitate their illicit activities. I gained their trust, slowly but surely, and began to gather evidence of their crimes. I recorded conversations, photographed documents, and traced financial transactions. The evidence was damning, a clear indictment of their criminal enterprise. But as I delved deeper into their world, I discovered something even more disturbing. Ethan wasn't just involved in financial crimes, he was also implicated in something far darker. The hushed phone calls, the coded messages, the veiled references to special projects, all pointed to something sinister. I discovered that Ethan had been using the organization to traffic substances and weapons. He had been profiting from the misery of others, fueling violence and corruption in the community. The revelation sickened me. I realized that Ethan wasn't just a fraud, he was a monster. I knew that I had to stop him, not just for my own sake, but for the sake of everyone who had been harmed by his actions. I decided to blow the whistle, to expose the entire criminal enterprise to the authorities. I contacted the FBI and provided them with the evidence I had gathered. They launched an investigation, and within weeks, the organization was dismantled. Ethan and his accomplices were arrested and charged with a litany of crimes, including fraud, money laundering, substance trafficking, and weapons dealing. My parents, implicated in the scheme, were also arrested and charged with aiding and abetting. The weight of their betrayal finally crushed them, their facade of denial shattered by the cold reality of their actions. They lost everything. Their wealth, their reputation, their freedom. They were ostracized by their community, abandoned by their friends, and condemned by their own daughter. And me? I just smiled. Justice had been served. The world was a better place without Ethan and his cronies. But even as I celebrated their downfall, I knew that the scars of their betrayal would remain, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks within the human heart. The distorted voice, the chilling checkmate, never materialized into a tangible threat. Perhaps the dismantling of their organization was enough. Perhaps they simply underestimated my resolve. Whatever the reason, I survived. I rebuilt my life, stronger and more resilient than ever before. I found peace, not in revenge, but in the knowledge that I had done the right thing. I had exposed the truth, I had brought down a criminal empire, and I had protected others from harm. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.